everybody. Good afternoon. First thing I just got to say is thank you for being here. This is an incredible audience. To hear a human rights activist speak, I would have never in my wildest dreams thought that I'd have such a big audience. Bitcoin does a lot of amazing things, and one thing it's done is transform me and my organization and what we've been able to do. So, huge thanks to Satoshi Nakamoto, wherever you are. Thank you, Satoshi. As was hinted at, we live in a world where governments and some of the most powerful people on our planet continue to tell us that Bitcoin is useless or worse or dangerous. This has been happening for more than a decade. People continue to be gaslit by the media and the government in every country, essentially, save for maybe a few, into thinking that this thing is risky and dangerous and maybe bad for the planet and bad for people and good for criminals. And it's just such an incredible global brainwashing operation. I mean, it's one of these things that in 10 years we're going to look back in time and be like, I can't believe that happened. I can't believe all of these important, people that were supposed to be leaders in the world were telling us this technology was bad, when it is far from it. So what I hope to do today and tomorrow is walk you through in detail what Bitcoin does around the world and how transformative it is and how it's changing lives and how it's changing our relationship with freedom and commerce and electric power. So we're gonna start with our friend Jamie here. So I have a few slides with people who are trusted by Wall Street, by Washington, by world leaders, and they're just completely wrong. I mean, this is somebody who really should know better. This is something he said. I personally think Bitcoin is worthless. Warren Buffett has said that Bitcoin has no unique value at all. It's a delusion, basically. It's rat poison squared. Bill Gates has said that Bitcoin is a pure greater fool theory type of investment. Charlie Munger, rest in peace, said, I hate the Bitcoin success. I think the whole damn development is disgusting and contrary to the interests of civilization. The Fed's Neil Kashkari said just a couple months ago that more than a decade later, there's still no legitimate use case for Bitcoin. Okay, this is someone who's, has a very senior role in the world's most important monetary body, okay? And probably one of the most prestigious English language publications going back a century is The Atlantic. And just a couple months ago, they said in an essay that they published, 15 years into its existence, Bitcoin has yet to demonstrate any serious use case. So again, the world is so lost. And the crazy part is there's so many amazing use cases for Bitcoin. Now, I think that most people at this conference understand that the primary use case for Bitcoin is savings. I don't necessarily have to get too into that. It's been the best performing asset in the world since it was created. It is a profoundly effective wage technology, savings technology. It protects your purchasing power. I think most of the content at the conference here is talking about why that's the case, and people talk about the technology of that and the effect of that and why you should join the Bitcoin movement. So I don't really need to cover savings, but I wanted to cover three other areas where Bitcoin is really transforming the world. One is commerce, one is freedom, and one is power. So today we're going to talk about commerce and freedom. Tomorrow, same time, I'm going to come back and talk to you guys about power. So each sort of section I give, I'm going to give you a little manifesto, okay? To take home. One little TLDR. If you remember one thing for each, I'm giving that to you. So for commerce, it's we have financial privilege, okay? So, I'm guessing most of you here are Americans or potentially Europeans. You come from countries where the currency, the dollar or the euro potentially, is, reasonably good. It's reasonably strong. It's done decently well. You have access to stock markets and different ways to diversify your savings to protect yourself for the future. Generally speaking, the government is actually done things to try and protect people. For example, the FDIC, if a bank collapses, they're going to try and make you whole. This is completely rare on Earth. Less than 1 billion people live in a country with what's called a reserve currency, meaning other banks, other central banks and other governments want to save that currency and use it as savings. Only about 1 billion people live in a country that issues a reserve currency and that has property rights under a liberal democracy. Less than 1 billion people. So we're talking 7 billion people plus that live either under an authoritarian government that does not respect property rights at all, or that issues a terrible currency. So most people on Earth deal with terrible money all the time. We might not think of it because we're in America and our money's great and we can go around the world and we don't have to worry about exchanging it. It's basically useful everywhere. Most other currencies are like, as Lynn Alden puts it, like arcade tokens. Like if you leave, a country like Togo with the currency from Togo, you go to France, you go to the United States or China, it's totally worthless. It's not worth anything. So we are very, very privileged. Most people are not. This is a photograph I took in Malawi. I was there in December to learn about the impact Bitcoin is having on the world. Malawi is a small country in southeastern Africa. Only 11% of people in Malawi have electricity. Think about that for a second. The currency they use is called the kwacha. So the kwacha, is a very weak currency. Now these people, this is just a street market that I just took this picture. What's remarkable is that these are already some of the poorest people in the world. The average annual income in a place like Malawi is somewhere around $100, okay? Now, if you live in the capital, maybe you're making $500 or $1,000 a year. But, you could be making 20 or 40 bucks a year in some of these rural places. I mean, so these people already are dealing with, they're suffering. I mean, they're dealing with a lot. I mean, I know that they can, they're probably, satisfied in certain ways, but man, I mean, they are just so deprived in many other ways. And they're the last people in the world that needed a structural adjustment. So what happened in Malawi last year is that in coordination with the IMF, the government devalued the currency by 44% overnight. So this wasn't announced ahead of time to the people. Nobody, did a poll. They weren't like, hey, who wants to lose 44% of your value next Wednesday? No, that never happened. This is just normal. This happens to people all over the world. So overnight, their currency that they're earning their wages in, and they don't have, stock markets or access to dollars. They're stuck in this currency. Most people don't even have a bank account. They're just using cash. So the cash they have and the cash they're earning all of a sudden buys 44% less stuff, 44% less imports, rice, coffee, dollars, gold, whatever. So real estate, their purchasing power just takes a massive hit, okay? And again, they don't have the access that we do to like alternative things. Even people in countries like Argentina have a way out. They can get, into sort of a dollar system. These people can't, okay? So, it's just really tough, and it has a huge impact on commerce and on business. So this is like a flyer put out by one of the big telecoms that operates in Malawi. So what they're saying here is that the previous year, this telecom, made about 36 billion kwacha, okay? Let's say that's a few million bucks or whatever it is. Because of the devaluation, which in total was 66% because there was other devaluations, they're basically not making any money at all. They're making between -2 and 1.7 billion. So the impact this has on commerce and business is absolutely destructive. And that's the fiat system, okay? And it's being imposed on people all over the world with violence. So this is in Kenya. There were massive protests this summer in Kenya over a new IMF sort of coordinated bailout basically for the government that came with all these conditions, which meant higher taxes, less public services, and a currency devaluation. And people rose up and they protested against it, and the IMF told the Kenyan government to ignore the protests. So, I mean, this is being violently imposed on people. The way that the current system works is through violence and through control. Some really cool use cases for Bitcoin. Number one, Bitcoin users cannot be structurally adjusted. So if you're using Bitcoin, and I met plenty of Bitcoiners in Malawi, a lot of young people, they're very bright, they're doing some amazing things with Bitcoin there. They're just getting started, but it's going to be like a trickle that turns into a flood. Just watch. 10 years, there's going to be so much Bitcoin activity there. The people that are doing business and saving in Bitcoin, they can't be touched by a structural adjustment. Their purchasing power isn't going to go down by 44% tomorrow. They are sovereign and they are safe. Another really great use case is that they enjoy the real rate of exchange. So for example, if you're sending money to a place like Nigeria, and I'll just give you some general numbers, they're not fully accurate, but just to give you an idea. Let's say that your dollar buys 1,000 naira, which is the Nigerian currency, when you use something like Western Union. So let's say you send a remittance, an average remittance in the world today, meaning like someone who lives in America and is sending money back to their family in Nigeria, is around $200 or $300. So let's say they send $100 back to Nigeria using Western Union. Well, the recipient gets 1,000 naira per dollar minus the fees. But the real street rate is actually 2,000 per dollar. but the government has a rigged rate to steal from the people. If you use Bitcoin, you just send Bitcoin to the person in Nigeria, they go in the street and they sell it for 2,000 naira. So you're getting twice as much as your value if you use Bitcoin as opposed to some sort of fiat rail, in many cases. That's an amazing use case. Bitcoin users speak a global monetary language. Again, if you're in Malawi and you have the kwacha, it's totally useless outside of Malawi. Guess what? If you're earning Bitcoin in Malawi, which we'll get into, especially tomorrow, if you're mining, you're earning Bitcoin, you're not earning in kwacha, your money works everywhere. You can do anything. You can buy things all over the world. And this is super, super powerful. And people in Malawi told us how powerful this was. Another one is that Bitcoin users, in an ultimate sense, escape what I call the currency caste system. So there's like 160, 180 different currencies all around the world, and people get trapped inside of them. Okay? It's like when you have Egypt getting adjusted right now, dictator's getting a bailout, he's got to devalue the currency to take the loan. People are trapped. They don't really have access to like dollars or euros. So, they're trapped, and then, the foreign markets get cheaper Egyptian labor and goods, and that's how the system is all designed. The system is basically designed to squeeze people around the world for our benefit. It's a cruel thing, but it's true. And I think we just should be humble about it and understand that that is part of how the world works. We are very successful in the United States for a lot of reasons, including really noble ones like individual rights and our republic and all these things, and that's awesome. And we have a lot to be proud of, but a lot of the other reasons that we and other countries, over time have been successful is because we exploit other people. I mean, it's just reality. So, I think that Bitcoin is great because it allows people to escape that system. Moving along, when we think about commerce and people trading and transacting with each other, remember, 2 billion people, aren't banked and don't have ID. I mean, that's pretty wild. They can all use Bitcoin. You don't need any paperwork to use Bitcoin. It's very, very powerful. Here's just some data from a book called Resistance Money that I would encourage you to check out. I mean, some of these numbers are wild. 22% of Indians don't have a bank account. That's almost 250 million people. In China, you've got over 100 million people with no bank account. Even in Egypt, you've got almost 50 million. And women are often hit the hardest, right? So maybe in the United States, most women are banked, but in countries like Egypt and Nicaragua and Lebanon, very, very few women have bank accounts. Guess what? Bitcoin doesn't care what your gender is. All right, now inflation. Some of us obviously experienced a little bit of that in the last few years in the United States, but my friend who lived in Venezuela was telling me this is what she told me, that her cup of coffee when she was living there in 2016 cost 450 bolivars. 2017 it cost 4,500. In 2018 it cost 1.4 million. So what you're watching is just the vaporization of the lower middle classes and their savings. The wealthy figured out ways around it, but the average person got crushed. Again, Bitcoin is an escape. There are people who got out of this system through Bitcoin. This is a way that the Venezuelan government tried to block aid coming in. This is a photo from the New York Times. They literally tried to block people trying to help starving individuals in Venezuela. And you know what? Like, before Bitcoin, like, they could kind of do that. But what you don't see in this photo are the millions of dollars of Bitcoin going back and forth, helping people, helping families. It can't be stopped. So this idea of, like, governments controlling us is going in basically the trash bin of history, which is great. This is a pretty well-known kind of meme in Bitcoin. It happened about 5 years ago. There's an account that likes to make fun of Bitcoin, and it's saying there's not a single goddamn thing that Bitcoin can do that Apple Pay doesn't already do 10 times better. And the crazy part is this person doesn't realize, like, very few people on this planet have access to Apple Pay. So Zia is a very, very brave Iranian Bitcoin educator. He's amazing. He went to prison for 8 to 10 months. We didn't know if he'd make it out, and this was during the women life freedom protests in Iran. He came out. He's still active. He's amazing. And, he says, I can't use Apple Pay, PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, or anything like them. I'm from Iran. I can't use Bitcoin. What do you have to say? Person obviously didn't say anything. Crickets. Because there's no response to that. That's because Bitcoin cannot discriminate. That's one of its biggest superpowers. Bitcoin users, again, they don't need a bank account or ID. It's permissionless money. All money that you've ever used, pretty much, you've had to ask permission to use. That's so crazy. Now we have a new money that you don't have to ask anyone's permission to use, and that's very powerful. Again, as I was showing you, Bitcoin users cannot be hyperinflated. That's an amazing use case, okay? And at the end of the day, maybe Bitcoin isn't for everyone. Maybe you're fine with your dollars, but it is for anyone, and that's very, very powerful. I wanted to read this just to give you a sense of the humanitarian impact this thing has. Basically, this doctor was commenting that, humanitarian actors are struggling. They can't get financial services when they're in war zones. They get payments refused. They have banks closed down. She was working with the EU and the US government, all these different institutions, and she still couldn't reach the people she was trying to help. They had to carry cash in suitcases. And that's like very risky and dangerous, obviously, if you're walking around with a suitcase. And she says at a major humanitarian conference, one big humanitarian actor said that payment issues are now the #1 threat to the humanitarian space. Okay, well, like Bitcoin essentially fixes that. I mean, you can just have direct peer-to-peer access to anyone else in the world with Bitcoin. You can get the aid to where it needs to go, and people understand that. So these are headlines like Turks piling into Bitcoin. You know, people going crazy in Lebanon for Bitcoin, trying to get into it, trying to learn more about it, helping people in Ukraine after the Russian invasion, helping people in Argentina who are suffering. I mean, this is happening. This is not going away. This is a permanent shift in the world's monetary system, and it's a very welcome one. This is sort of a chart showing the data is about a year and a half old, so it's a lot more today. But you know, roughly about 10% of the world has, in terms of people between the ages of 16 and 64, have interacted in some way with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. But what's interesting is that the countries with the highest rates of adoption, getting up to close to 20% and beyond today, are countries that have had big problems, economic crises. You talk about Nigeria's on there, Argentina, and people who have worse currency flock to this thing. It shouldn't surprise you. And it makes sense. Like if you're doing business, if you're doing commerce, if you're trying to pay somebody who works for you and they live in one of these countries, it's a nightmare. Well, not anymore. You can just use Bitcoin. It's so important for remote work, for AI, for all that stuff. It's going to be so nice to have one open, neutral money for the world. Very, very important. And you know what? You don't even need to use internet to use Bitcoin. My friend KG, who's actually on a different stage talking right now about this amazing project that he created, Machankura, he's from South Africa, and he created something that we probably wouldn't have thought of here in America because most of us have internet. Well, 600 million people in Africa don't have the internet. And he created a way for people just using a feature phone, which looks like this. It has no internet, just using SMS to log in and use Bitcoin. It's really amazing. So you don't even need the internet to use Bitcoin. So it really can reach nearly everyone. All right, so that's commerce. Now we're going to move to freedom. And my mantra for this one is that Bitcoin is bad for dictators. I want you to remember that one. Bitcoin is bad for dictators. What do dictators need? They need control, right? And what does Bitcoin do? It gives control to people and takes it away from government. All right, so this is how money used to work, right? For many, many generations, we used sort of bearer instrument paper or metal money. It didn't tell anything about you to the person that you bought something from. So you went and bought a newspaper, used some cash. The person doesn't know your name or your address or any of that stuff. They can't predict what you're going to do next. They don't know what you did in the past. But now, in today's world, most money is digital, and it's just completely tracked and surveilled. I mean, when you go buy something with a credit card, that information is immediately sold to data markets. I know this because a few years ago, I was buying dog treats for my dog, toothbrush-shaped dog treats at a pet food store. And it wasn't online. I put the credit card in the terminal. I walked out of the store. A few minutes later, I got hit with an ad on social media for toothbrush-shaped dog treats. I'm like, wait a second. How did they know? Like, if it was geolocation, how did they know I didn't buy, like, parrot food? Like, what's going on here? And I looked into it, and I learned from my credit card company that I was using at the time, and they disclose this in the massive amount of paperwork that they give you when you sign up for a credit card, that they sell your information right away, for advertising. So the whole thing is built on advertising. The whole sort of internet today is built on this idea that, like, you're the product, right? Well, Bitcoin is just a completely different way to do digital money. It's a way to do digital money and keep our freedom. And that's very important because 5.7 billion people live under authoritarianism. All right, and I know that, like, a lot of you here don't like any government, and I'm with you, that's fine. But, like, let's be realistic. Like, there's the difference between Texas and Tibet, right? So, we at least we can get here. I can make fun of the president here. I can go on TV. I can make fun of people. We can protest. We can sue the government. Awesome. Okay, we're not perfect, but we can do these things. You can't do any of that stuff in authoritarian regimes. You can't start an environmental group. You can't even start a freaking stamp collecting group without them shutting you down or potentially killing you if you criticize the leader. That's the case for most people in the world. We enjoy a lot of freedoms here that we often, I think forget or take for granted. Ironically, the very first use case really for freedom and Bitcoin as freedom money was by someone who was being persecuted by our government, Julian Assange. So what's interesting about this was very early in Bitcoin's sort of life story. It was when it wasn't worth very much. But basically, after Julian Assange released Collateral Murder, and he was showing some of the war crimes of the U.S. and causing a lot of stress in America over what we were doing abroad, the U.S. government shut down the ability of people to make donations to him. So they instructed all the credit card companies and PayPal to freeze everything. It's called a banking blockade. So what Julian figured out in the summer of 2011 was that he could use Bitcoin. And he posted a Bitcoin address to the WikiLeaks Twitter account. And everything else is history. His supporters were able to reach him, even though the most powerful governments in the world wanted him to stop. That's because Bitcoin doesn't ask for permission and doesn't care who you are. It works, which is really, really magical. Now, today, it's unfortunately par for the course for dictatorships and authoritarian governments to go after people by freezing their bank accounts. It wasn't really possible 20, 30 years ago because we just didn't have the sophisticated technology. Not everybody was using digital payments. But now we have lots of ways to target you. So in Nicaragua, Ortega's going after everybody with bank freezing. The church, the schools, the students, the universities, the Jesuits. So anyone who disagrees with them, he freezes their bank account. You know what? That sucks, okay? So guess what? We now have programs to help people in Nicaragua educate, learn about Bitcoin. And this is a worldwide phenomenon. Hong Kong, they're freezing bank accounts. India freezes the bank accounts of abolitionists fighting against slavery, of environmentalists, of people looking into Modi's corruption. Russia freezes bank accounts of anyone who disagrees with Putin. Turkey does the same thing. It's happening all over the world. And it gets very sophisticated. This is really scary. This is from Iran. So in Iran today, right now they've installed all these cameras in major cities. And if they see, and they're using algorithms, right? And if they see that a woman isn't properly wearing her headscarf, her hijab, right? She gets auto-fined, okay? She gets auto-fined. I mean, this is crazy. So you can start to think about where it's going to go from here. It's not going to be pretty. The centralized digital payment system we have is built with one end only, and that's total control. But again, Bitcoin gives us a way out. So with Bitcoin, Xi Jinping can't micro-track you. Putin can't freeze you. The Burmese government, which likes to sort of delete the property records of ethnic minorities, they can't delete you. And Chavismo cannot hyperinflate you, most importantly. And again, people are fighting back. It's really awesome to see. So, of course, Julian, got kicked out of the fiat money system. Well, later he thanked the U.S. government for a 50,000% return on his Bitcoin. And most importantly, look, he's a free man today for the most part because a Bitcoin donor paid for his flight to leave to go back to Australia. So, Bitcoin continues to help in this important case. This is the first time when HRF got involved with Bitcoin was actually 10 years ago, or 11 years ago in Ukraine. This was from 2013. Ukrainians were protesting against their corrupt government, and they couldn't have any access to financial services abroad. Like, no one could donate using a traditional bank wire or anything like that. Only Bitcoin can reach them. This is a post from 2013. It was a fundraiser we did in Bitcoin. And, these guys came to us, and they were like, can we do this Bitcoin fundraiser? We were like, what? Like, this is crazy. But we were open-minded, and we did it, and it worked. And to our surprise, it worked. And everything's just been downhill from there. Now, like, the global activist community is totally wired to use Bitcoin. Navalny, again, rest in peace, before he was murdered by the Russian government, his organization was one of the sort of biggest users of Bitcoin. They've always used Bitcoin for donations going back to 2016 because Putin would come in and steal their money and mess with their bank accounts, but he can't mess with Bitcoin. So it's very powerful. It keeps democracy alive. It keeps freedom alive in many places. It powered protests in Nigeria a few years ago. It powered protests in Belarus. I mean, this is a truly global thing. It helps people escape from collapsing economies. This is a story of a Venezuelan who used Bitcoin to get out of Venezuela. I've personally interviewed people from Afghanistan, from Burma, from many, many places like Syria and Venezuela who've escaped with their wealth in their hands. I mean, this is never possible before. My ancestors fled from the Holocaust. Like, they couldn't bring anything with them. Now people can liquidate what they have into Bitcoin and cross a border with a seed phrase, with their money memorized in their head, maybe even. It's really amazing. I mean, this is an incredible use case that you just cannot do with the US dollar. And for people to sit there and say this thing is useless is so profoundly ignorant. And you know what? We've had enough of it. So that's what we're here today, to talk about all this stuff. In Afghanistan, it's helping women get educated. Ever since the Taliban took over Afghanistan, it's impossible to send money there. It's impossible to send the US dollar there. The US dollar just doesn't do that. It's not good at that. You can't possibly do that. Well, Bitcoin does it. So my friend Roya Mahboub, who's been doing this for 10 years, she sends Bitcoin to teachers, and they teach underground education, and it works. And the teachers go into the market, and they sell the Bitcoin for local currency to sort of people in the street, in the Hawala system. It works there. In Palestine, it works. There's horrible atrocities being committed against the Palestinian people by the Israelis, and with our money, unfortunately, right now, and very few people are willing to do anything about it. But Bitcoiners have snapped into action, And this one Palestinian guy, he's in Gaza. He's been orchestrating this thing. It's amazing. If you want to get involved, you can take a screenshot of the QR. It takes you to the Geyser Fund that's doing the crowdfunding for this. He's helped 20,000 families through Bitcoin. Nobody's helping anybody in Gaza now, but this guy's helping. It's really amazing. So this is another really profound thing that you can do with Bitcoin that you cannot do with the US dollar. And it cuts across all issues and political lines. In Ukraine, it's the same thing. Ukrainians who fled from Putin's invasion, they were able to bring their wealth with them. Just think about this, and CNBC did a story on this. If you brought your Bitcoin with you and you escaped and you had to go to Poland or Germany or whatever, you could just go to a Bitcoin ATM, no ID, and you can withdraw your Bitcoin into local currency. You can't do that with the fiat banking system. So again, another remarkable use case. And it even is interesting in Western societies too. Look, we're not perfect. Like the Canadians, they froze the bank accounts and the GoFundMe fundraisers of the truckers, okay? Regardless of what you think about the truckers, the interesting thing here is that 100% of the fiat funds raised by the truckers were confiscated, at the press of a button. 70% of the Bitcoin made it to the truckers. That's amazing. I mean, that really shows the power of this thing to be a protest tool. And look, even like marginalized communities in our country, they use this thing. Look, whether it be marijuana business, the gun business, or sex workers, people who are marginalized, people who are prosecuted under Operation Choke Point and all this nonsense, they've been able to use Bitcoin because the government can't stop Bitcoin. And even in a democracy, that's important. And I would say especially in a democracy, that's important. Even in the darkest places in the world, North Korea, all these women escape North Korea. They all get enslaved and sex trafficked in China. It's horrible. It happens every year. Thousands of people do this every year. They're put through this horror. And Yeonmi Park, who survived that herself, she came in 2 years ago on the stage, told you all that it's very hard to use the US dollar to rescue these women. Basically, they use pastors and church groups to rescue people who are trapped in China. And it's very hard to use the US dollar, but Bitcoin has made their job so much easier. So look, Bitcoin is a light in the darkest of places. Bitcoin users can escape the central bank digital currency endgame that's coming. I mean, all that digital money, it's all evolving into a totally programmable tool that eventually is going to happen. I mean, if we didn't have Bitcoin, we'd be screwed. We'd have interest rates, negative interest rates. You'd have expiration dates on your money. You'd have, restrictions on how much meat or oil you could buy or where you could go. So we can get out of that dystopia through this thing. That's an amazing use case. And, at the end of the day, we just have to ask, how do the dictators feel about Bitcoin? Well, what do dictators need, right? So dictators need censorship, confiscation, and closed capital markets. What is Bitcoin? And what's the American idea? Well, red, white, and blue, free speech, property rights, and open capital markets. So I think, there's going to be a transition. And no one knows if it's going to be pretty or hard or easy. It might be tough. But on the other side, we're going to have an amazing America that's really rooted in the idea of power coming back to the people in the form of economic power in the hands of the people. Look, in my job, I do a lot of human rights activism. I can say in the industry, a lot of that's virtue signaling. I mean, what does, free country acts really do? But by helping someone achieve financial freedom, that's real impact. I mean, I would basically propose to you that pound for pound, helping people learn about Bitcoin might be the single most effective form of human rights activism. It really might be. So yeah, let's go. So all of you can be human rights activists. We can all be human rights activists. We can have an army of human rights activists because what we're doing is we're educating people about how to use freedom money. And this is my last slide for you to take a picture of. To all the haters and deniers who say Bitcoin is useless or dangerous, Bitcoin is out there every day, every hour, in collapsed economies and in the darkest corners of the world, helping people that no one else is willing to help, being a lifeline for anybody. Fiat money has failed most people on earth badly. Our monetary and aid systems exploit and repress instead of delivering prosperity and freedom. But Bitcoin is slowly, steadily uniting, enriching, and liberating the world. We went on a journey, and we talked about use cases for Bitcoin and how governments and the media have been gaslighting us for more than a decade, telling us that Bitcoin is dangerous or useless, that it has no use case. And we talked at length about how Bitcoin has so many important use cases when it comes to commerce and when it comes to freedom. And at the end of the day, we already know that Bitcoin is the best savings technology in the world. It's the best appreciating asset ever since it was created. So I don't need to necessarily tell you guys about the use case of savings. That's what this conference is all about. And we covered commerce and freedom yesterday. We covered how powerful it is to have an open money that anybody in the whole world can use, that cannot discriminate, that's not political, that can't be frozen just because you disagree with the government. We covered how it's an incredibly important tool for humanitarian aid and for funding freedom activities worldwide, whether it be in dictatorships or in democracies. But today, we're going to talk about power. And as I gave you yesterday, 2 mantras for each section. I said, we have financial privilege, and I said Bitcoin is bad for dictators. Well, today, we're going to talk about how Bitcoin saves wasted energy. This talk's a little different from yesterday. I think many of you sort of more maybe intuitively can understand how Bitcoin is freedom money. Maybe you've heard that before. But a lot of people don't necessarily understand the relationship between Bitcoin and energy and how it's going to change humanity's relationship with energy. So with that, we're going to start with this quote from Robert Bryce. Electricity matters because it is the ultimate poverty killer. If you don't have electricity, you don't have anything. You don't have freedom. You don't have economic activity. You don't have civilization. One of the most important things we can do in the world is try and move people who are at the bottom left part of this chart up to the top right of this chart. This is a chart of income versus electricity consumption. Something you will notice here is that there's no such thing as a rich country that doesn't use a lot of energy per capita. The only way to get from the bottom left, where you have the DR Congo and Niger and Haiti, up to the top right, where you have Norway and the United States and Iceland, is to use a lot of energy. In fact, as you can see from this slide, which compares Vietnam and South Korea over time, the more energy these countries used per capita, the richer they got. So this idea that we need to, we're using too much is nonsense. It's all about abundance, and it's about how we get there. And honestly, you could say that humanity's most urgent mission is to move the people that are in the bottom left part of this chart up to the top right. There's 4 billion people down in the bottom left corner who don't have a lot of electricity access, who don't have a lot of electricity per capita, right? And that really limits their ability to plan for their future, to choose what they want to do, to educate themselves, to travel around the world. Electricity is the greatest limiter, but it's also the greatest superpower for humans. And it's really astonishing to step back and consider. I know that we're in this wonderful state of Tennessee. We're in Nashville. We have amazing infrastructure. We have the Tennessee Valley Authority. We have all this stuff. In Africa, there are places like I visited in December in Malawi, beautiful country. They call it the warm heart of Africa. Only 11% of people have electricity. Think about that for a second. So 89% of people don't have electricity in this country. And there's not a whole lot of people that are working on that. No one's really working on that. There's almost 700 million people in Africa who don't have any electricity, okay? There's almost 1 billion people worldwide who don't, and there's way more than that who have what we call energy poverty, who don't have a lot of electricity. The crazy part is Malawi has enormous energy abundance. It's got incredible rivers and solar and wind and geothermal, but there's been no sort of capitalist incentive to get these people power until now. So what we're going to talk about is how one of the use cases of Bitcoin, in addition to being freedom money, in addition to connecting anybody in the world to one open global marketplace on one currency that can't be stopped, is that it also is going to end up bringing power to every single person in Africa who doesn't have power. That's going to happen over the next few decades, and Bitcoin mining is going to do it. I was invited by Eric Hirschman and Janet and Philip and their team from Gridless to visit this remarkable place at the base of Mount Mulanje. It's the highest peak in southern Africa, one of the most stunning places I've ever seen. I mean, it rivals Yosemite. There's very few people there because there's very little infrastructure there. What you see here is a little canyon, and there's a river running through it. And at that river site, about 20 years ago, the Scottish government decided to think about funding what's called a micro-hydro station. Okay, so it's like a small off-grid site where the running water is converted to electricity for the people who are nearby. Because it's what's called concessional financing, which is what powers most energy projects across the rural world, all across the planet, from Latin America to Southeast Asia, concessional financing basically just means donation. Somebody's just giving money. They don't have skin in the game. They're not going to fund OpEx. They're only going to fund CapEx. So first of all, it took them about 15 years to get this off the ground. These people in Bondo didn't have electricity until a couple years ago. Because there was no skin in the game. The Scottish government wasn't going to make money from this venture. The incentives were not aligned. But we went up to the top of the reservoir. This is where the river comes down, and the river flows down through the turbines, and it looks like this inside the little hut. And you know what? There's just a profound problem that you realize when you visit a site like this. The people in the town and the village and the local merchants and the local businesses, they sleep every night. They don't use power at night. So there's very little power demand in the evening. But the river never sleeps. So at night, there's just all this wasted energy. And you start to realize every single energy production site on Earth wastes energy. We waste so much energy. And today, because of what Gridless is doing, there's a Bitcoin mine there. And the Bitcoin network is buying 100% of the electricity that the town and the surrounding area doesn't use. And this is completely transformative for a variety of reasons. Yeah, shout out to Gridless. So amazing. So what's happening here is a couple things. Number one, for the local power company, which used to basically be a charitable project, they're no longer paying everything out of their own pocket. They have a new source of income, which is all the Bitcoin coming in from the mining operation, from all the electricity that wasn't used before. And we're talking the majority of electricity that this place generates was going wasted. And now it's all being bought by the Bitcoin network. And here's the kicker. They're not being paid in kwacha, the currency in Malawi that's collapsing. They're being paid in cold, hard Bitcoin and sats directly to their offices. They don't need to deal with accountants and paperwork and Forex. No, they just get Bitcoin. It's incredibly powerful for these people. So it allows them to have capital. Now, the local power company can think about building, and they are expanding, and they're going to connect more homes. Gridless, the company that owns the miners, they're also winning. They're going to come in, and within a year or two at these sites, they're profitable, which is amazing. And number three, most importantly, probably for most of you, the local residents. Now, the local residents, we got to meet the chieftains of the village at a meeting. It was very special. It was very profound. And what's really amazing is they're paying less now for the electricity. What happens, it's sort of counterintuitive. The media will tell you, oh, the Bitcoin miners are coming in and they're making electricity more expensive. That's completely false. That's not what happens at all. What's actually happening here is that because the power company can only sell about 20% of what it makes to the local population because there's just not that much demand, it ends up charging 5 times more for the price. So these guys are paying 80 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity in the middle of nowhere, even though they're surrounded by energy. Meanwhile, here in the States, I know the prices have been going up lately, but in the advanced democratic world, we pay, anywhere from 10 to 30 cents. So despite the fact that they're so poor and vulnerable, they're paying way more than us. This doesn't make any sense. We were led to believe that we are in progress around the world. Electricity and technology was supposed to get cheaper. For them, it's getting more expensive. And Bitcoin changes that, and it's so profound. And look, they weren't Bitcoin experts, but they knew what it was doing to their community, and they knew that electricity was the thing that mattered almost the most. I mean, the stories they told us about how it's changed their town. I mean, children that couldn't study at night. They had to they are now, the rate at which their children are now getting into the good schools has skyrocketed since they got electricity. They no longer have to walk to surrounding villages 20 kilometers to get medicine. Funnily enough, the men who used to go to town to watch football, they can be at home with their families and really build family and build community. So, Bitcoin is changing everything for this little town. And this is just one example of what is happening all across Africa and soon all across the developing world. And one of the most interesting things that I sort of observed here is when you go to the back of the Bitcoin mine, you put your hand up, it's a furnace. It's so hot. The externality of Bitcoin mining is heat. It's just a heater. The Bitcoin miner just turns electricity into heat. That's really what it's doing, right? So people are smart, and they figured out, wait a second, we can actually use that. So what you're seeing here is 1,000 miles north of Malawi in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in Virunga National Park, which is where the silverback gorillas are, and 5 million people live in this park in the surrounding regions. You'll see a couple Bitcoin miners there talking to a guy who runs Virunga National Park, the Conservancy. And the park is pretty smart. In 2020, they started mining Bitcoin with the excess energy they had from their hydro stations. So they've done very well, and it's been a lifeline for the park. But additionally, in the area, they have a lot of other things they make. But what you see behind them is cocoa. So cocoa is taken and it's put out on these mats. And there's animals and birds and wind, and they're trying to dry it, but it's not very effective, right? And it's not even sanitary enough to be sold to EU markets.
So what happens is they were like, look, we're going to buy $200,000 of industrial heaters so that we can actually sell this stuff and make more money. Our friends, the Bitcoin miners, were like, no, don't do that. Buy $200,000 of ASICs instead. And that's what they did. And now they're processing cocoa way faster, way more efficiently, and it turns into this beautiful chocolate, which I was able to eat. It's incredible. This chocolate is made by Bitcoin mining. I visited sites in Norway where the externality of all the hydro mining they do is drying seaweed for consumption around the world. So you kind of have to understand that in the future, it's not going to just be cost of Bitcoin mining and profit of Bitcoin mining. It's going to be profit of Bitcoin mining plus profit of the externality minus the cost. And this is going to change everything. I encourage you to watch a Reason documentary about a bathhouse in Brooklyn that's heating the spa where you go with Bitcoin mining. The Bitcoin miners are submersed in a liquid, and they run and they create heat, and they heat the water of the spa. And this is the coolest part. The guy who runs the spa is paying less for power now than he did before, plus he's mining Bitcoin. So this is just going to revolutionize everything. What you start to realize is if you're not mining Bitcoin, you're wasting energy. And that's the exact opposite of what the media tells you. I also got an opportunity to visit a geothermal site in Kenya. So this is just very simple. They dig a very deep hole in the ground. Heat comes up, it turns into steam, it spins a turbine. This thing is going to generate the same amount of power for the next 40 years. Clean, consistent, renewable, carbon-free, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they have so much of it in Kenya. It's one of the world's largest sources of geothermal power. It's right on the Rift Valley. And, one thing I learned when I was there, was really surprised by, is Kenya is the world's largest exporter of flowers. So what happens is they take the geothermal or the hydro, and they power pumps like this, which is on a lake. And they pump the water to a field, and they grow flowers, and they sell it to Europe or wherever. And that's like how the country, earns income, essentially. And, what's amazing is that you start to realize there's no grid here. So it's not like they can sell the excess power to somebody else. No. This is like rural Kenya. And on the right, you'll see a shack that has the pump inside. And the pump's not on all the time, right? The pump's pumping sometimes, not pumping other times. But the geothermal power is constant. It's always coming. It's always coming. So on the left, and we'll just kind of zoom in here, that's a Starlink, and that's sitting on top of a Bitcoin mine. And the most amazing thing is that this thing is buying, again, 100% of the power that the pump's not using. So all of a sudden, we've eliminated waste, and we are going to become much more efficient as a species. And honestly, it's going to create so much abundance because it's going to unlock people's ability to use all the electricity sources around them. So you can see inside, we got some miners here. This is so cool. What Gridless does is everything's made in Africa. Like the whole design they have, everything's made in Africa. And this is like a chart on one of the founder's phones he was showing me, where if you look at this thing and there's this green line going up and down, above the red, that's all when the Bitcoin mining machines are turned on. So they're mining whenever that green line goes above the red line. And when it goes below the red line, the machines aren't on. And it's just this dynamic, flexible power demand source that's paying the company that runs the station, it's paying Gridless, and it's reducing the cost of power for anyone else in the region. I mean, it's sort of magical, but that's what Bitcoin mining is. But it's not just going to solve issues in Kenya or in Malawi. It's going to solve issues here, too. So this is I live in California, and this is a chart that I was really shocked by. So this is from the California, grid, basically. And between 2019 and 2023, in America, we use the word curtailment instead of waste because it's sort of like a euphemism, right? Curtailed. But we were wasting millions of megawatt hours of energy. So, I mean, this is massive amounts of energy that we are wasting in our country. And, just to give you an idea, in 2021, my state curtailed 1,500 kilowatt hours of solar and wind. That's enough to power 220,000 homes for a year. In the Southwest Power region, which is sort of in the middle of the country, nearly 6,300 kilowatt hours of wind was curtailed. That's enough to power 600,000 homes for a year. And, this is not just American problem. It's a problem all over the world. The UK, get this, the UK spent 500 million pounds wasting wind energy in 2021. How insane is that? And the crazy part is Bitcoin fixes this. We don't need to do this anymore. We can just run all of this renewable energy all the time, and whatever isn't bought by whoever is there, the Bitcoin network is going to buy and turn into capital for more growth and more abundance, and so we can continue to grow as a civilization. This is a chart from a book called Resistance Money. I really would encourage you to pick up a copy. It's a phenomenal book. And what you see here in the white is how much energy Bitcoin consumes, right? So compared to like air conditioning, the big one, chemicals, iron and steel. The difference is, as I've been trying to explain, Bitcoin mining saves wasted energy. So, I know that the media and the government want you to look at this and be like, oh my God, this is terrible. Bitcoin mining uses so much energy. We actually want that circle to be as big as possible, because the bigger Bitcoin mining is, the healthier we are going to be as a society. I wanted to sort of dive into this a little bit. This is something some of you may have seen, this image. And people always say, well, we could always create a solar grid the size of this square and power the world in the Sahara Desert. Well, you can't do that because that's not how solar energy works. Now, fossils do work that way, right? So you can dig fossils out of the ground in Algeria, and in fact, a lot of that powers all kinds of stuff in the United States. And the interesting thing here is that fossils are more modular, right? So fossils, we don't tend to waste. We're not going to just waste a bunch of fossil fuels. We use them, and we use them carefully. And when the oil exporters sense that the market is weak, they stop digging it out of the ground. There's a much sort of tighter relationship with fossils and the way we use fossils. So long term, fossils aren't necessarily really going to power Bitcoin mining. What Bitcoin mining is going to feast on is renewable energy and baseload power, like nuclear and potentially, of course, hydro, geothermal, biomass. I mean, because God controls that stuff. We don't. It's sunny, it's not sunny, it's windy, it's not windy. We can't control that. But Bitcoin it can buy everything that's consumed. So this is something we're going to start to understand. And look, these countries, if they wanted to, they could turn all that stuff into capital with Bitcoin mining. And I want us to sort of try to rewire our brains here. So this is a New York Times article, where they're trying to scare you about Bitcoin mining. And they're saying, Bitcoin uses more electricity than many countries. How is that possible? Well, what if they said this? What if they said Bitcoin saves more electricity than many countries? That's super exciting, right? Here's another one. Bitcoin consumes more electricity than Argentina. Oh my God, that's horrible. Well, what if Bitcoin saves more electricity than Argentina? That's incredible, right? So we need to rewire our brains and understand that one of the most profound use cases for Bitcoin is saving wasted energy and understanding that, listen, man, if you're not mining Bitcoin, you're wasting energy. So that's sort of the deal. Just to conclude, that today and yesterday combined is sort of one big talk about all the use cases of Bitcoin that you may not hear about. Again, we understand savings, but there are so many use cases for this thing that's so valuable. And the fact that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and all these people, Jamie Dimon, they get up there and they tell you it's useless. The Fed tells you it's useless. The Atlantic Magazine tells you it's useless. They're either gaslighting you or they're just ignorant. It is so useful to so many people around the world, whether it be because they don't have the financial privilege that we have. They don't have access to the dollar economy. They don't have access to the stock markets. They just might have terrible paper money that collapses. Their savings technology might be sheet metal or cows. For so many people in this world, that is the technology they're using to save, and Bitcoin dramatically upgrades them. And again, the commercial aspect of it, think even just about remote work, when you have got an international company, you're paying somebody in some other country, it's such a nightmare to pay them. Bitcoin just cuts through all that nonsense, and it can really empower so many people in that sense. It's so bad for dictators. It is something that transfers power from the state to the people, and that's something that they are very scared of. As we move through this transitionary time, it's going to be more clear that only countries that have values like property rights, free speech, and open capital markets are going to be able to coexist with Bitcoin. So Tennessee can definitely coexist with Bitcoin, but the CCP cannot. So that's just something to think about as we move forward. And then finally, again, Bitcoin saves wasted energy. Now, I'll conclude with something here. How do we feel about ESG investing? What do we think? Okay, down, yeah, okay. Well, here's the funny part, though. If we actually think about what Bitcoin is, Bitcoin, from an environmental point of view, reduces energy waste and expands green power. Bitcoin, from a social point of view, is the best possible investment you could ever make. It expands financial inclusion, and it promotes human rights in every corner of the world where no one else is willing to help. And we're talking about North Korea, Gaza, all over, Venezuela, places that no aid organization can reach, places that no one really cares about due to whatever reason. Bitcoin is there every day helping people. It is such a profoundly good thing for you to invest in. And from a government's point of view, it's neutral and it's incorruptible. There's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. No bureaucrat can change that. No one can inflate it if they want to. It's one open standard for everyone. So kind of the funniest thing here is that for all this talk about ESG, Bitcoin is the best ESG investment on the planet. And the funny thing is, we're gonna start to figure this out. Okay, so it's already happening, right? So we have the former president of the United States about to come speak. We have governors. The governor of Tennessee came and spoke at a Bitcoin event yesterday with someone from the Tennessee Valley Authority and one of the senators from this great state. We have nations mining Bitcoin, not just what I showed you today. The government of Kenya is turning its waste into Bitcoin. The government of Ethiopia is doing this. There are all kinds of governments mining all around the world. This thing's already starting to happen. So we're seeing political adoption. We're seeing, of course, we have Wall Street adoption, and we have nation-state mining adoption. This is happening. So this is not something for you to sleep on. And again, it's so profoundly exciting because it provides us a new way to progress as humans where we don't have to rely on altruism. The reason why there's 600 to 700 million people without power in Africa today is because it requires altruism to give them power. It requires them to make a donation where they're not going to get anything back in a capitalistic sense. Bitcoin completely rewires the situation. It completely changes the system where now people are going to come in and give power to all those other people, and they're going to make money doing it. So it's basically this incredible machine that turns self-interest into freedom. And I couldn't be more happy to be here to help talk through these things with you guys. I hope to see you next time. Thanks so much, Nashville.
We are here with Alex Gladstein, the Chief Strategy Officer of the Human Rights Foundation. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. You just got off the main stage. You were talking a bit about mining, educating the audience about mining. Could you tell us a little bit about what you talked about?
Sure. Well, happy to be here and honored to get the opportunity to be up on the main stage with so many other luminaries. This week's been amazing. The content I've seen, the things that are happening. The world is changing, and we're right here for it. We got front row seats. We got the former President of the United States about to speak, which we'll get to. Yesterday, here and also at Bitcoin Park and other places, there was so much going on. I saw a panel with the governor of Tennessee, someone from the Tennessee Valley Authority, and a senator talking about how they're going to make Tennessee this nuclear mining capital, basically. Beautiful. And they're expanding nuclear, and they're going to use Bitcoin mining to help bootstrap that. It's unbelievable. And got so much good content. Obviously, RFK, that was very interesting. Look, we all know he's not going to be president, but look, Bitcoin's about memes. And he. Well, the funny thing is, it was a Kennedy that was more bullish than any Bitcoin podcaster has ever been, even jokingly.
Yep.
He gets up there and he explains that he would buy 4 million Bitcoin. I mean, it's like that's the new meme, though.
It is.
That's the new bar. It's moving the Overton window.
This is true. Could I actually ask you a quick question about that? We had Femi Longe, who just joined your organization.
Yes.
You announced that this weekend. He was on the desk earlier.
Okay.
And he was actually saying, he shared his thoughts on that. And he was saying maybe it's not so great that America acquires all this Bitcoin, right?
And they're not. Like, they're not going to, even the idea of buying that much, they're not going to get there. But, you know, whether or not it's good or not is not really for us to decide. I mean, we have to just sort of deal with it. It's going to be the evolution of Bitcoin as it monetizes from zero, from an idea, into the global reserve currency of choice for everybody in the world. And that's just the journey we're on. And, you know, at the beginning, it was just computer programmers and people operating on the Silk Road who realized it was valuable. And then over time, human rights activists and environmentalists and journalists. And now you have Wall Street, and now you have nation-state mining, and you have nation-state adoption, and now you have the leaders of the most powerful country in the world. So this is just the journey. And there's a great Alan Farrington essay on this called Wittgenstein's Money.
Yep.
And it's talking about, well, what would it look like if something went from nothing to the world reserve currency? Well, it would look a lot like this.
What we're watching right now.
And that's literally what's happening. And the RFK thing was just another fork in the road. You know, he was here last year, and he didn't really say a whole lot. And this year he gets up there and he just delivers this policy speech that's like boom, 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 boom. Yep. And what he said about retail transactions and being able to use Bitcoin as a currency without it being taxable events when you buy things was maybe even more profound than the idea of buying it.
Agreed.
Now, that's something I bet most Bitcoiners can get behind.
Yep.
Let us use Bitcoin as a currency. Don't buy it. You don't need to buy it. They'll be forced to buying it eventually.
Yep.
They'll mine it. They'll buy it. They'll use Bitcoin mining to balance power loads and to bring us into the future. of energy, but the most important thing is just let us be.
Yep.
Let us use freedom money.
Yep.
And that's the best thing they could do. Yep. That's the best thing the U.S. government could do is just let us use it as currency.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You just mentioned, you talked about balancing power loads. So that's a bit of a technical term that is associated with Bitcoin mining. Could you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, in my speech, I talked about how I had my eyes opened by a journey to different countries in Africa last year when I went with Gridless, amazing team, Eric, Janet, Philip.
Shout out.
And what you learn is that countries like Malawi, only 11% of people have electricity. And, essentially, there is no one working on that. There's no one who's going to bring them all online. There's no capitalistic incentive that makes sense. Most of the power infrastructure in rural Africa, rural places around the world, is all concessionally financed, meaning donation. It relies on altruism, which isn't really going to get you very far. This changes everything with Bitcoin mining. And we were visiting these sites where it's okay, you're in a micro hydro, which is a small turbine powering a village from running water in a river in a remote location. And you have to understand there's no grid to sell the excess energy to. So at night, the village sleeps.
Yep.
They have no power demand, basically none. The river never sleeps. So it's you have this wasted energy. And you start to realize every single power location in the world wastes energy. Bitcoin mining saves wasted energy. It turns that wasted energy into capital. It buys 100% of what the village and the surrounding area doesn't want or doesn't need or doesn't buy. And it sells it to the Bitcoin network.
Yep.
And Bitcoin network is buying all of that. And the best part is it's paying in Bitcoin, not the local kwacha collapsing currency. It's a huge deal. So then it allows the local power company to have a better balance sheet, to build up, to expand, to build more power, to bring more power. And this is all self-interest.
Yep.
They're making money, Gridless is making money, and the people are paying less for their power.
Yep.
This is a little paradoxical for most people. They're like, wait, I thought that Bitcoin miners, were a drag on the network and are making things expensive. No, that's a lie. It's actually the opposite. Because now the power company can sell 100% of what it produces, it can charge less.
Yep.
So you're going to see this price of power drop. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And in Malawi, too, I think I read something in one of the essays that you wrote on this. There's further this is leading to more electrification in these areas, and as you just said, at a cheaper rate as well. Could you dive a little bit more into that if possible?
Well, look, just in that example, now that we have Bitcoin mining, the power company can afford to go build another micro hydro. They can afford to connect more homes. And they're going to do it out of their own self-interest. They're not going to do it for altruistic reasons. You don't need Bill Gates or the UN or Warren Buffett to come in and make a big donation. No, we don't need to wait for that. They're never going to do that. If we relied on that, these people would live in darkness forever.
Yeah.
This is going to make it happen for people around the world who don't have access to electricity. Because the crazy irony is most of them live in a place of massive abundance.
Yep.
Solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, all around them. And they can't harness it because they never had a way to align incentives before.
Yep.
Bitcoin changes everything on that front. And it's not just in, I talk about how it's not just in sort of poorer countries where this is going to happen. It's happening in advanced democracies, too.
Yep.
Look at my state of California. I was showing how much we waste every year. The UK government wastes. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year wasting wind energy. Bitcoin fixes that so dramatically. Now it's going to pay you instead of you paying it. It's just so transformative.
New paradigm.
It does, it's hard for people to swallow because they've been lied to for a decade plus by the government and the media, which has been telling them that Bitcoin is dangerous and risky. The reality is it's not, and it's really good for us, and it's really good for the planet. It's going to make, more green power,
Yep.
and it's going to have more electricity per capita for everybody, and that's how you advance civilization. I used a chart that showed, basically income per capita versus electricity consumption per capita.
Yep.
You don't want to be down here. You want to be up here, and the only way to get from down here to up here is to use more electricity. I showed case examples of South Korea and Vietnam, and as they used more electricity, they got richer. It's very basic.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin is a technology that can help us bring the 4 billion people who don't have a whole lot of electricity or none at all, and bring them up and to the right, which is really the most important thing we can do as humans, because without power, you don't have health, you don't have wealth, you don't have civilization. So this is how we advance, is to use more power, and Bitcoin's going to help us do that. And the final thing I'll just say is that, there's an important distinction between fossils and renewables, because fossils are more modular. We don't really waste a whole lot of them. We can talk about flaring, but generally speaking, when there's less demand, they dig less out of the ground.
Right.
Okay, that's not how renewables work at all. It's up to God. There's whatever. There's wind, there's sun. We don't control it. Bitcoin buys, all of what's produced.
Yeah.
And then, the demand is the demand, and Bitcoin just saves the rest.
Interesting,
and
amazing. Yeah.
So that's the idea.
We appreciate that. Thank you for the breakdown. Also, you used this term aligned incentives, which is often used in Bitcoin. So when people have the same incentives, this word alignment has come up a lot since we've been here. There's a large contingent, I think, of conservatives here, obviously, to see President Trump. And there's this alignment of incentives with, conservatives purport to support more. Purport to support more financial privacy, more financial freedom. Bitcoin purports to foster these things as well. But on the other side of things, I'm kind of curious as to what you think about this. We have Democrats who often talk about financial inclusion and other things that Bitcoin provides as well. So I'm curious, your thoughts on Trump, and then also, are the Democrats eventually going to come on board?
Well, we don't know. We don't know what Trump's going to say. I mean, of course, the rumors here are that he doesn't want to be upstaged by RFK, who came out with this wildly bullish sort of idea. So we'll see. I mean, that's interesting. I think taking politics out of it, it's remarkable that the former president of the United States is going to come give a speech at the Bitcoin conference. Just completely, I mean, it doesn't matter what party they're in. Like, that is insane. 10 years ago, a time traveler probably would not have believed you.
Yeah.
We went from being, 3 years ago, really excited about a smaller Latin American country that, frankly, most Americans haven't really heard of, to the former president of the United States. Like, that is a freaking leap year advance, step function advance. Now we're there. Now we had Kamala's team debating. She ended up not coming. The point is, it's now, Bitcoin is in the national conversation. It's not going anywhere. And the folks at BPI do such a good job making that the case. And their summit in D.C. every spring is so important to support and to attend, where we can help educate our lawmakers. And again, look, people have different opinions about the U.S. government adopting Bitcoin. Fine. But we want Americans to adopt Bitcoin.
Agreed,
So let's push the government to the side. You know, they're probably not going to buy a lot of Bitcoin. That's fine. We may not even want them to Femi's point. Maybe we want other countries to accumulate it. We'll see. But what we definitely don't want them to do is to go after developers making Bitcoin more usable as a currency and more private. Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, a brilliant move by you guys to do this in Tennessee. The amount of interaction with the Tennessee lawmakers has been extraordinary. I mean, I watched conversations with the governor yesterday, with senators, talking about how they're going to use Bitcoin mining to harness the excess nuclear power that they're building out here. But something else that was very interesting that happened was I was on a panel with the Attorney General of Tennessee, and we were talking about the attacks on Bitcoin developers, which really are a continuation of the crypto wars from the early 90s, where Phil Zimmerman, who took the stage the other day, which was amazing, I got to meet him. I just was like, thank you very much for putting everything on the line back then. It's happening again, and it's happening to people who are developing open source tools like Samurai. And we had Zach Shapiro from BPI on the panel with Matt Odell and myself. We're discussing this, and he was very bullish on Tennessee pushing back against the federal government on these things and providing a framework to protect open source development related to Bitcoin privacy. And it's very important if Tennessee is willing to do that, because they can create briefs and they can push forward and make frameworks that then the government has to respond to. So he's basically committed to that. I watched this happen live. So the Tennessee government is now going to work with BPI to challenge attacks on Bitcoin developers. And that is an incredible, that's the single outcome of this conference that's amazing. And of course it's not.
Bouncing off what Alex saying, really, I mean, this is cypherpunk values going into mainstream politics, right? You said Phil Zimmerman, a veteran of the crypto wars. Man, wow, that he's on stage here speaking at a Bitcoin conference, and how important it is to kind of bridge this history, right? Bitcoin magazine host sometimes, and then a historian on Twitter and on X, if you follow me there. I kind of go into the cypherpunk history, and, just bouncing off what you said, the cypherpunks really were a political group, right, in the 90s in California, and they were really activated by this idea that, in a digital age, we wouldn't have privacy. You read people like Hal Finney, like Phil Zimmerman. They were worried about many of the issues that we see today and that politicians are now responding to, and essentially it was this lack of privacy in the digital age, and now we have Bitcoin, the digital cash, hopefully bringing more privacy to our financial lives. But obviously the case of William Hill and Keanu Rodriguez and the Samurai developers chilling, because it reminds us of this history, and really the worst parts of this history, which is government overreach, but government prosecution of individuals who are merely writing and publishing code, right? That's what happened during the crypto wars. So the PGP, pretty good privacy. This was the project that Phil Zimmermann brought to the world. You might be familiar with it. This was a piece of code that he wrote that was treated by the government as a munition.
Yes.
It was as akin as he launched, open sourced the code for a nuclear weapon, right? That's how they prosecuted him, and this was a case that lasted for years. You can talk to the veterans like Adam Back who are still around, and they'll tell you about this. But echoes today, right? That's why I think it's important that there's political engagement, even as there's worries about partisanship at the conference.
I appreciate all that context, Pete, and I actually want to touch on this while you're here, Alex, especially. Why is privacy important, especially to the people that you work with in the human rights field?
Well, when we talked with the AG, of Tennessee down here, what was super interesting was that we discussed the idea of, is it American to go after a blacksmith if the knife that he made was used in a crime? No, of course not. You go after the criminal. So, that's what is happening now. They're going after the blacksmith for somebody else's crime, and it's not American. Now, it might be what they do in Europe or China or somewhere else, but it's nice to see that there are American officials willing to step up to that. And the way that it connects with the work we do at HRF is very important. Now, due to historical coincidence, essentially, or the values and virtues we have in Western society, a lot of the privacy tools were made here, okay? We don't actually know who Satoshi Nakamoto was, but they were probably in an advanced democracy of some kind. It seems likely. And obviously, Hal Finney and many others were in America or Europe who helped to build the tools we have today that allow us to have sovereignty, privacy on the internet. So if we're attacking people at home, it hurts everybody. So, like, for example, when the Phoenix folks who make a very effective Lightning wallet pulled out of the U.S. market due to concerns that maybe they could get sued, which is really depressing that the U.S. government is creating that environment. Like, we should be getting people to come here to build. We should be encouraging entrepreneurship and innovation, and instead we're on a short list of, like, North Korea and Turkmenistan for countries that can't use Phoenix.
Yep.
So, we can change that, and if we don't, it sucks for human rights activists globally, because all of a sudden their ability to use Phoenix as they're traveling gets limited, and it's just not, it sucks. So what we want to do is help the officials here, and DPI does such a good job of this, understand that they can play a role in defending human rights for everybody by making America a place that people can come and build Bitcoin tools. Like, of course, I think this is very important from the mining perspective, but
Yes.
we also have to build Bitcoin here.
Right.
Yep.
Right?
I was going to say, I think Samurai should be exciting, right? This is something that I think we should want to build, right? This is simply a tool that takes a transaction, that accepts it, and then you are able to withdraw the same amount of cryptocurrency that you put in. It's simply a service that kind of moves cryptocurrency, or in this case Bitcoin, around. Obviously there's some privacy benefits, but this tool doesn't require a central operator, yet the operators are being accused of money laundering, right? This is traditionally something that a company would have to register, and the argument, of course, is that they are a company, even though this is simply their code, their speech, right? And as we've seen in the U.S. law, there is this precedent that code is speech, right? And I think it's important that that gets upheld.
Appreciate that. Appreciate the context, and also the fact that the developers of Samurai Wallet were never actually touching customer funds, yet they're being charged as a money service business. Quite intense. Pete, you're the Bitcoin historian. You've been covering crypto full time, or Bitcoin and crypto full time for over a decade. Have you ever seen anything
Don't say it like that.
Have you ever seen anything that has had this sort of chilling effect, or is that has developers so nervous?
Well, I think we've been in a series of chilling effects, right? We haven't talked about it, but the China migration. China earlier we were talking to Scott Pressler, conservative commentator, about this, and he was curious about China, right? And China, of course, had a tremendous advantage, right? This was a country where, because of their ability to produce mining chips or computer chips just generally, 60-70% of the global mining power, again, these are the machines that are competing to produce new Bitcoins, were consolidated in the country, and rather than embracing it, rather than using this really as a tool to advance their own country, they simply banned this industry and sent their miners abroad, and that's why there are so many miners here. It's very interesting to see Donald Trump kind of seize on that opportunity. But yeah, when you take this perspective, I think it's important to remember that Bitcoin exists in this geopolitical way, and that we've seen just hostility from so many places in China right now. Even if you're a CEO of a cryptocurrency or Bitcoin company, there in many cases they can't leave their homes, they can't travel, right? So there's this idea that Bitcoin might face kind of some overreach in America, but this has already happened, right? China really did take such a negative attitude, and I think maybe it hasn't been as bad in America, but it can get better, right? We've seen businesses struggle to get banking, startups that were debanked, right? So there hasn't been a level playing field, and I think that's what the industry is calling for. It merely just wants to compete against existing financial services.
Appreciate that. Yeah. And in that context, so there hasn't been a level playing field, and you're talking about what's been important here in America, things that we've upheld, or the idea that things can get better here in America. In a place like China, maybe we don't expect that so much. Alex, from what you're seeing around the world, you're one of the people who have sort of made it, I think, more public knowledge that it's the exception, not the rule, to live in a liberal democracy.
Sure.
So there's authoritarian regimes around the world. How much of what comes out of America is not only going to influence other liberal democracies, but other leaders, what they're going to see from America on Bitcoin, maybe the broader crypto space as well, and how is that going to affect things worldwide?
Well, in the earliest days of Bitcoin, my organization, HRF, was involved in something called SOPA PIPA, which was what the U.S. government was trying to do, was basically allow corporations to start censoring the internet. And one of the fears we had, because we don't really work on domestic policy, but we were afraid that this would create a chilling effect where dictators would say, oh, look, America's doing that, so we're going to do it too. So basically, whatever we do gets copied by everybody else. So like any sort of financial restrictions we have may get sort of dispersed through FATF and these other sort of alphabet soup organizations to dictators globally. So we are still, I know that we're not quite the city on the hill maybe we used to be, but like we matter a lot. And like what we do really carries weight around the world. And look, at the end of the day, I want to push back against this idea that a lot of, sadly, people sort of maybe on the Democrat side have that Bitcoin's like bad for America. This is sort of what Elizabeth Warren pushes, and it's fake. It's fake news, because if you think about it, and I mentioned this yesterday on my keynote, what do dictators need? They need three things. They need censorship, they need confiscation, and they need closed capital markets. So then I pose to the audience, well, what is Bitcoin, and what is the American idea? It's property rights, free speech, and open capital markets. So, ultimately, look, I think we're going to go through a transition here. We are a country today that issues the reserve currency. We can literally issue credits that buy oil. I mean, that has major benefits. But, a lot of that is tied up in a system that does a lot of exploitation of other people, and I think, globally, and I think that if we move to a system where we're more collaborative with the rest of the world, we'll actually be stronger. So this is sort of my thesis, is that America is going to be really dynamic in a Bitcoin world. And if you look around, yes, okay, it's going to be really rough for the CCP if the people have more power over the economy. That's going to be really bad for them. But it's not going to be bad for Nashville. It's not going to be bad for Tennessee.
I think the way that I would look at this question is, what does America gain from being against this invention, right? It is an invention. Bitcoin exists. It's out there in the world. It's a neutral, apolitical monetary system. What does America gain, right? We've seen our smartest people go abroad. Those companies move abroad. And we've seen that the industry has been held back, perhaps even from its full potential. And what does its full potential mean? Well, it obviously means jobs. It means innovation. I mean, look at how many companies are here. I mean, there has to be at least 100 companies here on the floor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's absolutely right. So, and in these businesses right now, even 12, 16 months ago, we're thinking, hey, like, we should move outside of America, right? So from merely an economic perspective, it's hard to see what the U.S. gains from sticking with its current policy.
Well, can I push back a little bit on that, if you don't mind, Pete? So we have dollar hegemony around the world, right? The dollar is the global reserve currency. There's maybe some fear that maybe Bitcoin might replace that one day. Do you think that factors into some of the political decisions that are being made right now?
Well, I don't think it's reached the level of political discourse where they're aware of it. I've had several conversations on this desk today where this has kind of come up, right? This natural competition between Bitcoin and the dollar. Of course, in the Bitcoin space, we believe that Bitcoin competes with the dollar, should compete with the dollar, that it will compete with the dollar. And I think we want to move away from the U.S. financial system as it's currently constructed because of all the great writing that Alex Gladstein does. You can go to bitcoinmagazine.com, and he talks about all of the, really like terrible nature of the system in terms of like what it takes to actually operate a global reserve currency for the U.S. dollar to maintain that status. Is that a conversation that Donald Trump is having backstage right now, where he's with a roundtable of industry executives? I don't know. I can't answer that question.
It is a conversation his vice president pick is having.
Oh, okay.
J.D. Vance has talked at length. He even questioned Jay Powell, head of the Fed, on this on the record last year. There's a video of it. You should watch it. And he's basically saying, you know what? Like, isn't it bad for the average American that we have the reserve currency? Doesn't it make it really hard for us to make things in a competitive way? Hasn't it hollowed out our industrial base? Hasn't it brought the plague of drug addiction to our people? And the Fed chair is basically like, yeah. So this is the externality of being the reserve currency that we don't often talk about. I mean, a lot of people know that it's bad for other countries.
Yes.
But a lot of people don't realize it's bad for the average American.
Yeah. So the strength of the dollar, obviously, it's something that makes exports more expensive. Is that what you're getting at? So when we send things abroad, we don't have as much money coming into the country as a result. Just to clarify,
because the dollar's so strong,
right.
we can't make stuff that's competitive on global markets.
Right.
So it all goes to China or wherever else. And it means that, essentially, our manufacturing base gets totally hollowed out, and now we're dependent on all these countries for all this important stuff. We're kind of paralyzed. And so if we can weaken the dollar, which this is what J.D. Vance and some of Trump's economic advisors want to do, they want to weaken the dollar and devalue the dollar like we did in the 80s to try and combat what was going on with Japan and the rivalry with Japan. We forced Japan to appreciate its currency so that they stopped becoming... We didn't want them to become the number one power in the world.
That's right.
And they were threatening to become one, and we said no, and we had the Plaza Accords and all this stuff. We basically forced Japan to strengthen its currency so it became less competitive so that we could sell more stuff.
Perfect.
And that's going to happen again. That's what they're proposing, is to devalue. Now, what do you want to hold in that situation? You probably want to hold Bitcoin.
I appreciate that, and that's a perfect note to end on.
Next year, we are bringing the Bitcoin conference to the American West, Las Vegas. The brightest minds in the world will converge to deliver Bitcoin history. Buy your tickets now at B.T.C/conference/2025.